My name is Meredith Cole. That night, in the middle of a snowstorm, I got a voicemail from my 6-year-old niece. Mom fell down. Nana locked the door. My heart stopped. My sister and her two little girls were stranded outside in freezing cold, and the ones who pushed them out were our own parents. Have you ever had to choose between blood and conscience? Choose to stand for what's right, even if it means standing against the very people who raised you? I never thought I'd return to that house. But this time, I wasn't going back as the obedient daughter. This story isn't just about a rescue in the snow. If you believe no one should ever have to go through something like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts, because what's coming next will keep you glued to the screen. What I didn't see coming was that they were the ones who had set the trap. I still remember the moment the headlights cut through the trees in front of the house. Everything was eerily silent, just the wind howling through brittle branches and the crunch of snow beneath the tires. The car stopped in front of the old wooden house I'd grown up in. It used to be home, but now it was just a cold shell of memories. The porch roof sagged under snow. One side of the fence leaned like it had given up. And on the steps I saw them. Hannah was curled up, one arm wrapped around her body, trembling violently. The two girls were pressed into her sides. The youngest, Lucy, sobbing with ragged breaths, her cheeks bright red from the wind. Emma, the older one, looked up at me, her eyes wide not with relief but with frozen fear. I flung open the car door and ran. The wind punched straight through my chest, icy down to my lungs. I dropped to my knees. My hand touched Hannah's arm, soaked with snow and ice cold. "It's me, Meredith, can you hear me?" I whispered, pressing my fingers to her neck, hoping for a pulse. Faint. But there. I pulled off my scarf and wrapped it around Lucy, then rushed all three of them into the car. The heater was already on, but it couldn't compete with the cold gnawing into their bones. I took off my coat and bundled Emma in it, pulling her close to my chest. "I'm so sorry, Emma, I got here too late." She didn't say a word, just nodded. Her tears had frozen on her cheeks. As I dialed 911, I glanced up at the porch. A warm yellow light spilled across the doorway, where someone stood. My mother. She wore a thick wool robe, holding a cup of tea. Her face was blank. Not a word, not a question. I stepped out of the car. "Do you know they almost died out here?" I shouted, my voice cracking in the wind. She took a sip of her tea, then said, almost casually, "She brought it on herself. She's no longer part of this family." I stepped forward, snow swallowing my ankles. "And the girls? Are they sinners too?" "They're the consequent—" My mother's voice was as cold as the wind slipping down my collar. "If you want to take them, then take them. But don't come back asking for anything." "I've never asked for anything," I snapped. "You're the one who always demanded our silence." Back in the car, my hands clutched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt something crack inside. Not my heart, but the quiet endurance of a daughter who had spent her whole life trying to be good enough, even if it meant erasing herself. We made it to the hospital in under 15 minutes. Lucy was rushed into emergency care for severe hypothermia. Hannah was taken straight into a monitored unit. She was still unconscious, her lips so pale I had to look away. Emma clung to my hand in the waiting room. She said nothing, but the watchful, guarded look in her eyes crushed me. What had she seen to make her stare like that? I'd just taken a sip of cold coffee from a paper cup when a woman walked in, wearing a thick coat and holding a clipboard. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. "Meredith Cole?" "Yes, that's me," I stood. "I'm Shannon from Child and Family Services. I need to speak with you about the two girls you brought in tonight." "They're my nieces. I brought them here because my sister was unconscious and left out in a snowstorm." I tried to steady my voice. We've received a report from the girls' grandparents. They say you took the children without legal consent. My heart sank. No, that's not true. Hannah is their mother. She was unconscious. I was trying to save them. I understand, Shannon said. But per protocol, we need to investigate. Do you have any documentation showing you're a temporary guardian? I stared at her, throat dry. No. I just did the only thing I could. She jotted something down. We'll monitor the children's condition closely, but I have to inform you that an emergency guardianship petition may be filed by the grandparents. I gasped, my hand tightening around the paper cup. The grandparents? They left their daughter and grandkids in the snow. They don't deserve. I'm not in a position to make that judgment, Shannon interrupted gently, like she was speaking to a stranger. We follow procedure. If you've ever watched the truth get twisted just because power was in the wrong hands, hit like so these stories can be heard. I looked out the waiting room window. The snow was falling harder. I'd come to rescue them, and now I was the one under scrutiny. No longer just the castaway daughter, I was now at risk of being stripped of any right to protect my family, by the very people who taught me to keep my mouth shut. And I began to realize it wasn't just Hannah they wanted silenced. They wanted us gone. For good. I sat motionless in that waiting room, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee I couldn't taste. Emma had been taken for respiratory and trauma evaluation, but she kept glancing over her shoulder to find me. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared. And that look, it cut through me like a blade. Not long after, I heard the soft roll of wheels down the hallway. A young nurse pushed Hannah on a gurney, her head tilted, lips dry and cracked. I shot to my feet. How is she? She came to briefly, but slipped back under, the nurse said gently. We're monitoring her closely. I nodded, biting my lip to keep from breaking down. I was about to return to my chair when a familiar voice echoed behind me. Miss Cole? I turned sharply. A tall man in a light brown trench coat stepped out from the hallway's shadows, hollow-eyed and worn. I didn't need more than a second to recognize him. Jason. Hannah's ex-husband. Once a father, once a husband, once the man with a charming smile in our family photos, until it all shattered. What are you doing here? I said coldly, stepping between him and the hallway entrance. Jason raised both hands, as if to calm me. I just heard what happened. About Hannah and the girls. I was worried. I looked at him, not believing a single word. He's worried, I repeated slowly. You mean the same kind of worry he showed Hannah when he punched her in the cheekbone 2 years ago? Jason flushed red. I already said. I had issues back then. I'm in therapy now. Good, then keep going to therapy. Somewhere else, I said and moved past him. But before I could walk by, Jason lightly placed a hand on my shoulder. Meredith, I'm filing for custody of Emma. I froze. What did you just say? Your family can't care for the girls. Hannah is clearly unfit. And you? You have no legal standing. I spoke to your parents. They agree. They'll support me. I peeled his hand off my shoulder and hissed, You're working with my parents? Jason looked me straight in the eye, not an ounce of shame. They just want what's best for the girls. And me? I'm still their biological father. I laughed, a laugh with no joy in it. You were their father, yes, but you were the kind of father who abandoned his wife and children, disappeared without a word, and came crawling back when he smelled an advantage. Jason shrugged. Think whatever you want, but we have an attorney. I stood there long after he walked away. My shirt stuck to my back with cold sweat, even though it was still snowing outside. I walked into the women's restroom, closed the door, and placed my hands on the sink. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. Dark circles under my eyes, lips pressed tight, and a gaze drained of energy. Slowly, I removed the red wool scarf from my neck and spread it across my palms. My grandmother knitted this for me back in ninth grade, when I caught a terrible cold from sleeping on the porch after an argument with my father about faith. She didn't say a word, just handed me the scarf and a cup of hot cocoa. No lectures, just quiet kindness. And from that day on, I'd never been without that scarf. In my worst moment, I looked at it now. Damp, dusted with snow, but still warm. Still a symbol of something worth holding on to. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about rescuing anyone anymore. This was war. Not a simple battle between right and wrong, but a war between truth and a powerful system, between real love and manufactured ownership. I left the restroom and headed straight to the front desk, asking to speak with the social worker handling our case. The receptionist radioed someone and directed me to a small conference room at the end of the hallway. I stepped in and saw Shannon reviewing a file. "I need to speak with you, seriously," I began. Shannon looked up. "I'm compiling the interim report. Is this urgent?" "I have evidence that Jason was investigated for child abuse in another state." Shannon blinked. "Do you have documentation?" "I need one day. I'm contacting someone who works with civil record checks, but I need you to postpone any custody filings he's making." Shannon sat quietly for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll flag the case for further review, but Meredith, I have to remind you again, without legal standing, you don't have a final say." I took a deep breath. "Then, I'll get legal standing." "Meaning?" "I'm filing for emergency custody," I said, my voice hard as granite. "And I'm going to fight until those girls never end up in the hands of people who left them to freeze in the snow." Shannon studied me a few seconds longer than usual, as if weighing whether I meant what I said. Then she nodded. "You'll need an attorney." "Immediately." I nodded. "I know exactly who to call." I stepped back into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed a familiar number. "Lucia? It's Meredith. I need your help saving my niece. This time, I can't afford to lose." I sat quietly in the car for almost an hour after that call with Lucia. The sky was still dark, but not the deep dark of night. More the faint, uncertain gray of a winter dawn over a snow-blanketed world. Everything felt frozen between two worlds, the past I had tried to escape, and the present I was now forced to face. Memories began flooding in. I was 17 when I was first sent to a retreat. My mother said it was a place to relearn humility. I couldn't understand what was so wrong with wanting to go to medical school, with questioning a belief system that demanded blind obedience. My father said nothing. He just nodded and silently signed the consent form to send me away for 3 weeks. The retreat was deep in the woods, no phone signal, no windows in the sleeping quarters. Each day began with mandatory prayer sessions, followed by internal dialogues, which were really just ways to convince us we were rebellious, sinful souls in need of reformation. I once had to sit alone in a pitch-black room for over 5 hours for looking at the instructor with defiance. I never told anyone about that except Hannah. The night before she left home, we sat together in the basement surrounded by Christmas decoration boxes. She told me she was pregnant, that Jason had become erratic, and that when she told our mother, she wasn't even angry. She just said, "Good, now you know there's no way out." Hannah laughed, not a happy laugh. "I don't think they hate us. I think they hate that we make our own decisions." I looked at her for a long moment, then replied, "And they taught us that obedience equals love." From childhood, we learned to read our parents' faces like scripture. One raised brow from our father meant I had said too much. One sideways glance from our mother would shut Hannah up mid-cry. But the scariest part wasn't their harshness. It was the conditional love, poured out when we played our roles right, pulled away the moment we stepped out of line. The first time I questioned their version of kindness was in 6th grade. I knocked over the blue porcelain vase on the hallway table. It was supposedly from Ireland, my great-grandmother's heirloom, as Mom always said. I didn't mean to break it. I was just dusting. But when it shattered, the house felt like it froze in place. My mom didn't say a word. She just turned away and wiped her tears. My dad made me stand in the middle of the living room as he called every relative present into a circle. He gave a long speech about responsibility, tradition, and the cost of carelessness. No one asked if I was hurt. No one asked if I was okay. Only Hannah quietly slipped a piece of cookie into my hand from her napkin when everyone left. She didn't say anything, just held my hand tightly. There are kinds of pain people can't see. No bruises, no blood. But it clings to you like the wrong color of paint on a wall. The more you scrape, the more it shows. That kind of pain had followed us for years, beneath the pretty layers of Sunday sermons and framed perfect family photos lining the halls. I thought about Emma, how she'd been so silent since arriving at the hospital. Once, when I reached to gently touch her cheek, she flinched, as if trained to shrink from contact. A 6-year-old child, whose first instinct was to recoil from an open hand. I knew what I had to do. I had to break the cycle. I had to do what no one in our family had ever dared. Tell the truth. Because if I don't do it now, then one day Emma will sit alone in some room, silent, knees tucked to her chest, wondering, what did I do wrong? And no one will be there to tell her that she did nothing wrong. That some mistakes don't belong to the youngest person in the story. I dialed Lucia again. When she picked up, I didn't greet her, I just said straight out, I'm ready to testify. Everything, my past, Hannah's, our parents. If necessary, I'll tell it all. Lucia's voice was soft but firm. Mère, once you start, there's no going back. Good, I said, because I don't want to go back. If you were ever taught that silence was a virtue, but your heart tells you the truth needs to be spoken, share that feeling. Someone else out there might be waiting for the courage to speak up. I arrived at Lucia's office in the late afternoon. Her law practice sat on the second floor of an old red brick building. No flashy signs, no gleaming glass windows, just a small brass plaque next to the door handle that read, Lucia Carter, Family Law and Child Advocacy. The early winter wind curled around my collar as I stepped up the creaky wooden stairs. My heart beat unevenly. Lucia opened the door with one hand, the other still holding a steaming mug of coffee. Come in, she said, skipping the small talk. Inside, the space was warm, filled with the scent of old paper and cinnamon. Several files were already open on the desk. She pushed a coffee mug toward me, her brown eyes bright behind her glasses. You sure? She asked, no fluff. I nodded. They've made their move. I can't stay on the sidelines anymore. Lucia motioned for me to sit. Jason has officially filed a petition for temporary custody. Based on documentation your parents submitted, they've described Hannah as mentally unstable, and you as someone emotionally unfit to care for children. I wasn't surprised. And what proof do they have? Only what they've fabricated, Lucia replied, flipping through a file. No legitimate medical diagnoses. But there is a 7-minute recording of a conversation between your mother and a pastor. In it, she says, we can't allow the children to be dragged into this moral collapse. We need to preserve the image of the family and community. I clenched my fists. They don't care about the girls. They care about appearances. Lucia nodded. And Jason? He has another motive. He's nearly bankrupt after his small business collapsed over contract fraud. In the petition, he wrote that he wants to rebuild his life with his daughter at the center. But I have a source who told me Jason met privately with your father 2 weeks before the snowstorm. I sat in silence. Lucia opened her laptop, tapped a few keys. A call recording popped up on the screen. Listen to this, she said. Jason's voice came through, clear. Slick, like he was pitching a product, not a person. I know how to handle it. She's weak now. A few unofficial medical reports should do it. The issue is Meredith. She's stubborn, but if we can get the girl back home, under religious supervision, it'll go down easier. Then my father's voice, deep, measured. I don't want publicity. We just need silence and order. Hannah's no longer one of us. But that little one, Emma, she can still be salvaged. I stopped the audio there. My chest went cold. Are you sure you want to take legal action against them? Lucia asked, her voice gentle but decisive. This won't just be defense anymore. If we counterattack, we need solid evidence. Enough to break the system they've built. I didn't hesitate. Help me find it. I'm ready to tear it all down. Lucia picked up the phone. Then first step, comb through every document involving trusts and family assets. If they're holding any inheritance under legal terms, we may be able to petition for a transfer. If we can prove manipulation. Suddenly, I remembered my grandmother. She once told me, after Grandpa passed, there was a final revised will. It granted guardianship authority to the legal caregiver of any minor children, if the parents were declared unfit. Lucia looked up. Where is that will now? No one's mentioned it in years. My mother said Grandma misplaced it, but I remember seeing a copy. It was in a blue file box with a crane bird design, stored in the old house attic. Lucia stood, pulled a folder bag from the shelf. We'll draft a petition to inspect the premises if there's reason to believe they're withholding legal documents. But first, do you know anyone in the family who was a witness when the will was signed? I thought for a moment. Aunt Elise, Grandpa's younger sister. She still lives in Iowa. I'll contact the local notary's office, request signature verification. Meanwhile, you need to write a formal statement detailing everything that happened since the night of the snowstorm, as thoroughly as possible. I nodded. Lucia poured more coffee, then sat across from me, locking eyes. Meh. This isn't just about custody anymore. This will expose a power structure they've protected their whole lives. Are you ready to face the fallout? I gripped the red wool scarf in my lap, my palms pressing into the fabric, worn but unyielding. I'm not afraid anymore, I said, my voice calmer than ever. Not because I'm strong, but because those girls deserve to live with the truth, not in the shadows they call order. 3 days later, I returned to the house where I grew up. This time, not to beg them to open the door, not to take anyone away, but to reclaim the truth. My SUV pulled up at the gate just as the noon sun lit the roof, melting patches of leftover snow. I stepped out, bundled in a thick coat, holding a temporary court-approved warrant for property inspection. The cold sunlight hit the worn wooden steps, where I once sat for hours, waiting for an apology I never earned. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there. No smile, no greeting, just a long, heavy stare, like I was some stranger bringing disruption. You have no right. The court temporarily authorized it, I said, raising the paper. I'm only here to retrieve documents relating to Grandpa's will, the one witnessed by Aunt Elise, notarized in 2006, stored in a blue file box. I trust you still have it. She squinted, hand tightening around the doorknob. There's nothing here for you to find. I didn't say another word. I just stepped across the threshold, and that first step into a house filled with the scent of wood polish and dried jasmine made my heart pound harder than any court hearing I'd ever witnessed. I walked straight up to the attic, the place where I used to hide with books every time we had church guests. It hadn't changed. Dusty, dimly lit by a weak yellow bulb, and the ceiling fan barely turning. I found the blue file box in just 5 minutes, wedged between 2 old Christmas wrapping bins. The label on the outside, handwritten in faded purple ink, still read, Trust Revision 2006. I knelt down and opened the lid. The documents inside were intact, but there was something I didn't remember. A handwritten note in my grandmother's clear script. If anything happens to me, please don't let them forget. Protecting a child is never betrayal. I once failed by staying silent. Don't let Meredith or Hannah pay for that anymore. I laid my hand on the edge of the paper, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like gratitude. She had tried to speak out in the only way she could, and now it was my turn. I carried the entire box downstairs. My mother was already standing at the foot of the stairs, arms crossed. "When did you learn to grovel like this just to come crawling back?" she asked, not angry, just dripping with disdain. I set the box on the table and looked her straight in the eye. "I didn't come back to beg for anything. I came to reclaim what belongs to the truth. Not to you, not to Dad, and certainly not to the so-called family honor you've always used as a shield. Honor is the only thing left when everything else falls apart," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "It's the first thing that collapses when you choose silence over protecting the children who needed you most." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. I turned away, carrying the box out of that house like I was removing the ashes of an old truth from a place that had tried to trap it forever. Lucia could hardly believe it when I placed the folder on her desk. "You actually found it?" "Not just the will," I said, placing my grandmother's handwritten note on top. "But proof that they knew and still chose to ignore it." Lucia opened the file, her eyes scanning each page. "Mère, this clause," she paused, pointing to the third line from the bottom. "Do you see it?" I leaned in to read. "If the designated guardian or trustee is declared morally unfit by the court, the legal authority shall transfer to the next direct blood relative, provided that person has previously provided actual protection to the minor child." Lucian looked up slowly. "If we can prove that your parents abused that trust and enabled an abuser, this doesn't just help Hannah regain custody. It means you, Meredith, could be granted full trustee authority under this clause." I looked at her, a strange feeling rising in my chest. "I don't want their money. But you do need the legal power to keep them out of the girls' lives for good," Lucia said, gently but firmly. I breathed slowly. "So, where do we start?" "Start by bringing it all to light," she said. "We'll request an emergency hearing. And you'll testify. If you've ever had to expose your own family to protect someone more vulnerable, leave a message. Sometimes the truth needs to be heard, not to punish, but to heal." The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning at the county courthouse about 10 miles from Lucia's home. That day was gray and cold, with a sharp drizzle that made it feel like winter wasn't ready to leave. I sat in the passenger seat of Lucia's car, holding the original case file and my grandmother's red wool scarf, folded, tucked into my coat pocket. Like a quiet oath I reminded myself to keep. Lucia drove with her left hand, her right holding a steaming cup of coffee. "No gavel slamming down today," she said, eyes still on the road. "But if we present enough evidence, the judge can grant a temporary protective order. And more importantly, deny Jason's custody petition." I nodded, my chest heavy like stone. We arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early. Inside, the waiting area was still mostly empty. A court clerk directed me to the witness prep room. Lucia handled check-in with the court secretary. No one said much. No one needed to. Everyone knew this morning wasn't just a hearing. It was the beginning of something my family had tried to bury for far too long. I sat alone in the waiting room, listening to the echo of shoes in the hallway. The door creaked open. Hannah stepped in. I stood up immediately. "You didn't need to come. You should be resting." Hannah shook her head. She still looked pale, but there was strength in her eyes. "No, I need to be here. I can't let you stand alone." I squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you're here." Moments later, a court officer gave us the signal. It was time. The courtroom wasn't large, but the air felt thick. Across the aisle, Jason sat beside his attorney. My mother was present too, in her usual ash-gray dress, rosary clutched in her hands like she was preparing for Mass. My father wasn't there. Maybe he knew his presence would only make things worse. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, silver hair neatly pinned back, her gaze stern, but not cold. She nodded as Lucia presented our documents. After a quick review, the judge spoke. We'll begin with the respondent's testimony. Ms. Sloan, if you're ready, please take the stand. I stepped to the center of the room, my hand gripping the edge of the documents. My breath was quieter than the clerk's pen scratching notes. My name is Meredith Sloan, I began, voice slightly shaking but clear. And I'm here today not out of resentment but in pursuit of the truth. I recounted the night of the snowstorm, named every act, from the midnight call to finding Hannah unconscious on the porch, Lucy turning blue, Emma trembling. I didn't skip a detail, didn't soften the pain. I spoke about my parents' response when I begged for help. The vacant stares, the warm cup of tea in my mother's hand while her grandchild nearly froze outside. I spoke of the fabricated investigation, the accusations invented to regain control, not out of love, but out of pride. Lucia followed next. She presented the original copy of my grandfather's will, clearly reading aloud the clause that allowed trustee authority to pass down if the primary heir was found morally unfit. She submitted my grandmother's handwritten note, with handwriting matched to other verified documents. Jason jumped to his feet. Objection! That evidence has no legal validity. The judge raised her hand, completely unfazed. Mr. Jason, sit down. The court has not ruled yet. Then she turned to me. Miss Sloan, I have one question. Why didn't you stay silent? You could have walked away, avoided all of this trouble. I looked at her, then over at Hannah, and then at Emma sitting outside the glass doors. Her eyes locked on mine. Because silence is what killed our safety from the very beginning, I said, my throat tightening. My family taught me to preserve appearances, to endure. But I watched my sister nearly lose her life for leaving an abusive husband. I saw children being used as tools to protect the reputations of adults. I can't stay silent anymore. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge gave a slight nod. The court acknowledges. I stepped down from the witness stand. No one spoke, but I knew something had shifted, not just inside that courtroom, but inside me. In how I would live from now on. After that hearing, I thought things might finally start to calm down, but in truth, it had only just begun. That night, I stayed at the small motel near the hospital, in a modest room with sheer curtains that let in the yellow streetlights. Hannah was in the bed across from me, holding Lucy. Emma lay between us, her hand clutching the old red scarf I had tucked under her pillow. I woke up around 3 a.m., not from any noise, but from a strange feeling, a silent alert gripping my chest. I picked up my phone. 3 missed calls, all from an unknown number, and 1 text. You have 24 hours. Withdraw the petition, or we'll release your full mental health history to the media and social services. I sat up, heart pounding. I had anticipated they might play dirty, but I hadn't expected this. A full, personal attack. Digging up old medical records. Undermining my credibility to reverse everything. And if there was one thing my father was better at than quoting scripture, it was crafting just plausible enough lies for people to believe. The next morning, I arrived at Lucia's office earlier than scheduled. She was reading news updates on her computer, scrolling through the local headlines. I handed her the phone to show her the message. Lucia didn't look surprised, just quietly opened another file. You had treatment after your breakup? She asked, without judgment. I nodded. After junior year of college. You remember, I lost my scholarship mid-semester. I panicked. I went to a doctor. But it wasn't a public hospital. It was a private center the church recommended. That place wasn't exactly transparent. Do you have the original records? No, They kept everything. My mom used to volunteer there. She might have requested a copy. Lucia sighed. If they really have those records, we'll need to prepare a response. But don't worry, there's one thing they don't know. She turned her screen toward me. A video, footage from the emergency room camera showing me carrying Hannah in that snowy night. Clear, complete. Hannah was pale, Lucy wasn't breathing, Emma was in shock. Lucia fast-forward to the part where I called the police and emergency services. My voice was shaky but steady. The EMT confirmed the emergency status, the time, the weather conditions. Undeniable evidence, Lucia said. Everything you did was to save lives. They can twist stories, but they can't erase this. I nodded, though my stomach stayed uneasy. I knew my parents wouldn't give up easily. To them, reputation was something worth defending at any cost, even if it meant burying their own children under it. That afternoon, when I took Emma to the child counseling center under temporary court order, I happened to spot a car parked across the street. A silver glaze SUV. The license plate was familiar. I wasn't wrong. It was Jason's car. I pulled Emma close and whispered, "Go on in first, sweetie. I'll come in right after you." I walked toward the car, every step sharper than the last. Jason was inside, eyes locked on the steering wheel. When I knocked on the window, he startled. "What are you doing here?" I asked through the glass. He lowered the window, trying to look casual. "I just wanted to make sure Emma was okay." By secretly watching her from a parking lot. Jason looked at me, his face unreadable. "I still have parental rights." I gave a dry laugh. "You had them, not anymore." He clenched his jaw but didn't argue. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Stop this, Jason. If there's any shred of decency left in you, let the girls have peace." He didn't respond. Just quietly rolled the window back up, started the car, and drove away. I didn't tell Hannah. She was already carrying too much. That night, just as I turned off the light, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. An older man, thin, wearing a knit cap, stood on the porch. "Are you Ms. Meredith?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah. I'm Dr. Ronnie. I used to work at Luther Pines Recovery Center. I met you when you were 21. I froze. He pulled a thick envelope from his coat. "I don't work there anymore. But when I saw your name in the news, I looked up your old file. They altered a lot after you left." I took it from him with trembling hands. "There was a handwritten self-assessment you completed. It was never included in the official record. I kept it because it didn't feel right. Now, I think it's time you had it back." I opened the envelope after he left. Inside was a photocopy, in my own handwriting. A short passage. "I'm not crazy. I just need a place where I'm not forced to stay silent. I want to study medicine. I want to be heard, not to prove I'm right, but to know that being wrong doesn't make me disappear." I sat on the floor, vision blurred with tears. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from a stranger at your door, from an old piece of paper, from the honesty of someone you never expected. If you've made it this far, you know what to do. Share so more people know the truth deserves to be spoken, even if it comes at a cost. My parents were suspiciously quiet in the days following Dr. Ronnie's visit. No new lawsuits, no phone calls, no lawyers showing up at the motel Hannah and I were staying at. A silence not born of remorse, but like the eerie calm before a new storm. I wasn't wrong. A few days later, a breaking story aired on the local news. Gracehaven Church, a place of worship, or a place of secret coerced surrenders. The first person to speak out wasn't me. It was a woman named Sharon, a former member of the church's maternity support group, now living in another state. She had been labeled a case for spiritual reflection back in 1998, placed in a secluded house behind the church, supervised directly by my mother. She said that when she got pregnant at 17, she was forced to sign away her baby after just a few confession prayers. She told me I'd go to hell if I kept the baby, Sharon said in the televised interview. She said, God loves you, but this child is proof of your sin. As it aired, I wasn't shocked, just hollow, like the wind had been sucked from my lungs. The things I'd only ever sensed growing up, that something was off, that it wasn't real faith, were finally confirmed in words. Soon after, reporters began digging into Grace Haven's old files. Somehow, Lucia had connected with a veteran NPR journalist, someone deeply familiar with conservative religious networks, but with an eye for truth. She kept pursuing the leads, and within a week, more stories surfaced. 7 women from 3 different decades confirmed they had been coerced into giving up children, subjected to forced treatment, or confined under the guise of private prayer. Among those directly named, my mother appeared in 5 testimonies. And my father, Reverend Harold Sloan, the man once hailed by the community as a light in the darkness, was identified as the one who signed off on most of the church's so-called disconnection rulings for unwed pregnant women. When the scandal broke wide, the National Church Oversight Board had to step in. The official suspension notice came the day I was sitting in the kitchen with Hannah and the 2 girls. The TV was on low volume, but the headline running across the screen stopped me cold. Reverend Harold Sloan and Mrs. Evelyn Sloan have been suspended indefinitely and are under internal investigation for alleged abuse of religious authority. Emma asked, "Auntie, does that mean Grandma and Grandpa won't be preaching anymore?" I looked at her. "Maybe they need to relearn what's right, sweetheart." That was how I told Emma, and it was also the first time I truly believed that justice could exist in the real world, not just in books. And Jason? Lucia found an old record in another state under an altered name, Jason R. Lowell. In that record, he had once been accused of child abuse at a foster center where he worked temporarily after leaving the military. The case was closed due to lack of evidence, but with Hannah's testimony, the audio recording of him admitting to conspiring with my parents to gain custody, and now this old file, law enforcement no longer had a reason to look the other way. Jason was placed under temporary arrest for conspiracy to obtain custody illegally and for concealing a prior record involving children. His main hearing is scheduled for next month. When I walked into Grace Haven Church for the last time, it wasn't for a service. It was to testify in a private disciplinary hearing before the National Church Council. I saw the empty pews and the chipped paint on the wooden cross above the pulpit. For years, I had looked up at that cross with fear. Now I looked at it with sorrow, for faith twisted, for young souls pushed away from the light in the name of false love. I remember clearly what the hearing chair asked me. "Miss Sloan, if your family had never betrayed you, would you still have spoken up?" I stayed quiet for a long moment, then answered, "Maybe not. But because they did betray me, I had to seek the truth. And this truth isn't for revenge. It's to stop a chain of harm before it swallows anyone else." As I walked out of that building, I didn't look back. A few days later, a letter arrived at Lucia's law office. Pale yellow envelope, handwriting shaky but familiar. The sender, my grandmother. Grandma. The one the family said had lost her memory. The one hidden away in a private nursing home. The one I hadn't been allowed to visit for years. I opened the letter. Inside was a handwritten note, less than a page long. She wrote about the day she discovered that Jason hadn't just hit Hannah. He had also been following Lucy to school. She had wanted to speak out, but when she brought it to my father, he said only one thing: "You lost your say the day you refused to baptize that child." Grandma was placed in the nursing home just a few weeks later. At the bottom of the letter she wrote, "My dear girl, silence is never a virtue. Truth doesn't need to be hidden beneath false piety. I'm proud of you for doing what no one else in this family had the courage to do. Protect the children, even when it went against blood." I placed that letter in a glass frame, right next to the red knit scarf on my desk. No one in the family talks about reputation anymore. Because this time, reputation wasn't what we were trying to protect. It was the children. On a spring morning at the end of April, The sky was a flawless blue. I stood at the kitchen window, holding a mug of herbal tea, quietly watching the garden out back. Hannah was sitting by the blooming tulips, her neatly cut hair glowing in the sun. Lucy was carefully watering each flower bed, and Emma was running around yelling at our cat Muffin, "Don't step on my carrots!" I laughed softly, leaning against the window frame. The house was an old farmhouse in the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska, rented from a friend of Lucia's, a place quiet enough, sunny enough, far enough from headlines and moral scrutiny, a place that didn't need high fences or alarms, a place that actually felt like home. I stepped out onto the porch, resting my hand on the wooden railing. Warmth seeped gently into my skin, soothing every part of me that had not yet healed. Emma spotted me first. She came dashing toward me, her yellow cotton dress fluttering behind her. "Auntie, do you know what day it is today?" I knelt down and scooped her into my arms. "Today's the day. I get to hug a very adorable little girl." Emma shook her head, laughing. "No, it's no silence day. At school they said it's the day when everyone gets to say something they used to hide." I paused. "Who taught you that?" Morgan. She said being quiet out of fear is never the right choice. And guess what? I told her about Grandma. "Which Grandma?" "Grandma Sloan." I said, "She once wrote you a letter that said, 'Being silent is betrayal.'" I looked at Emma, caught off guard. "And what did your teacher say?" She cried. Then she hugged me. She said I was the bravest kid she ever met. I held her tighter, eyes stinging. For the first time in months, I realized that not everything I did ended in silence. Some things, no matter how small, echoed forward into another generation and shifted the shape of belief. That afternoon, I received an email from the local education board, a formal invitation. They were asking me to join an advisory group for a pilot program called Safe Voice, designed to help schools identify and support children experiencing psychological trauma or abuse. They'd learned about me from an interview with Lucia, where she mentioned a woman who managed to save a whole family from systematic lies. I read the message over and over, not because I didn't believe it, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to be trusted. That night, after cleaning the kitchen and tucking the little ones into bed, I sat alone in the living room. On the wall was a familiar framed item, the red knit scarf, the one I'd held onto like a sacred object. I no longer wore it around my neck. I displayed it in a glass case, a symbol of everything we'd survived. I thought about all the things I once believed were lost: trust, belonging, family. And then I looked around. Everything was still here, just in a new form. No more church, no more pulpit, no more judgment-drenched prayers. Only the laughter of children, the smell of earth after rain, the sunset casting gold through the windows, and the quiet relief of no longer having to pretend to be the good daughter. I no longer wished for my parents to change. In truth, I didn't need them to. They chose the path they believed in. And I, at last, had chosen mine. Not a louder path or a more righteous one, but a path that wasn't silent anymore. One time Emma asked me, "Auntie, why do people always say the truth will set you free? I feel like when I tell the truth, I usually get in trouble." I sat down beside her, brushing her hair. "Because they think truth is only for fixing mistakes. But some truths aren't for fixing, they're to keep others from making the same mistake again." Emma nodded. "Then I think I like that second kind of truth better." I smiled. "So do I." And that very afternoon, I began writing a book. Not to accuse, not to blame, but to tell, piece by piece, the stories of the women who stayed silent too long and finally found their voices. The book is titled "The Red Scarf on the Snowy Steps," because sometimes all it takes to change a story is one person who didn't give up in the middle of a snowstorm. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. I know that each of you listening may walk away with a different emotion: anger, sorrow, regret, maybe even hope. But what I want to know is, if you were in my shoes, would you choose to speak up or stay silent? Do you think it's more important to preserve peace or to protect the truth, even if that truth could fracture a family? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Please share in the comments, because sometimes in someone else's voice, we find our own or become the anchor someone else desperately needs. And if you believe that stories like this, about family, about truth, about the things we're often too afraid to say, deserve to be told, then go ahead and follow this channel. There are many more journeys ahead, just as real, just as stirring, and just as human, waiting to be shared with you. See you in the next story.